Hi, I'm Marna, and I am a complete and utter mess today. You're getting me at the tail end of a long day of work, but I did promise that I would make a video about being a conscious observer. So here we go. Now, the first question people ask is, what does it mean to be a conscious observer? And this is to be aware that we exist separately from the thoughts that we think. It is one of the most complex aspects of any spiritual journey because it is changing yourself into a new state of awareness. Generally, when we want to observe ourselves as people, we begin with our body. We observe our body. We observe our emotions, our emotional response to triggers. And then we start to observe our thoughts. And after you start observing your thoughts, you realize that what is observing all of this is separate from these component parts. There are certain qualities that are, generally fairly consistent across most people who are in this journey of transformation. The first thing is the observer is not judgmental. The observer is not the ego self that's sitting there going, oh, how can you even think something like that? What is wrong with you? That is not the observer. That's the ego self passing judgment on the thoughts being observed. So the observer self is non-judgmental. Judgments really are just fixed patterns of thought and coping mechanisms that the ego creates so that we won't feel insufficient in ourselves. The observer is beyond that. However, if you catch yourself judging yourself, the observer doesn't judge you for judging that either. It truly is a paradoxical thing that way. The observer is not analyzing or labeling what you think. Again, that's a function of the ego trying to explain it all and analyze it. That's all ego self. The observer watches and accepts what is. The observer logs it all as it happens without feeling a need to dissect the meaning behind it. The observer exists purely in the moment. So the observer is always present while the experience is happening. And it functions almost like a video camera. It records the experience so that your ego self can later go back and look at it. As we begin to get to know this observer self, we are almost certainly coming towards it, approaching it from an ego perspective. And, this is a good place to start. We are familiar with our ego selves. We are familiar with how we think. We are familiar with why we think. We're used to approaching things from the ego point of view. So, in the beginning, as you're looking at the observer, you're likely to be looking at it from an egoistic standpoint and trying to dissect it and understand it. It's okay. It is a normal part of it, but it does take a lot of concentration to do that, whereas the observer exists outside of the need for concentration. The more you do this, though, the more you practice getting to recognize your observer, it becomes second nature. And then there's a point where you realize that you are simply in the state of the observer state of being without analyzing it, without the ego interfering. It's no longer an effort at this point. And if you can reach that without having to rely on any external things, fantastic, you're ahead of the game. But for most of us, it does take work to get there, and it can be painful getting there. Doing this process is not easy. Essentially, you're opening yourself up to all of that stuff, all the things that you have tucked away in the hidden corners that you conveniently try to forget about. All of that is no longer hidden. You become more sensitive to the discomforts and the cravings that you experience in the moment. And you start recognizing the reactions you have to in the moment things that you didn't realize that you reacted to. So it can be challenging. It can be overwhelming at times. If you've ever walked through a mall store, department store, and there's ladies running around spraying perfume, and you get hit with that full face blast of scent, that can be what it feels like when everything that you have been carefully repressing your entire life is no longer repressed. It can feel like you're drowning. But the benefits of reaching this state outweigh the pain, especially when you realize that moving through that pain is the path forward on your spiritual journey. You start experiencing more clarity within yourself. And the more clarity you have within, the more you understand the path that is right for you, the path that you are meant to be taking. And even though you're more sensitive to the pain, it gives you an idea of what you need to do to work through it. And in the long run, you actually suffer less because you are no longer holding on to and repressing that side of yourself. So that's the basics of what it is that we're trying to reach. So I'll do another video, keep moving forward. We'll do another video where we're talking about the steps you need to take so that you can bring this consciousness forward in yourself and stop acting out of your ego self and start observing your thoughts so that you're no longer caught up in them. Okay? Great. So come join me in the next video. I'm Marna, and thank you so much for being here. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am.